Aloha, everyone, and thank you for joining today's COVID-19 Public Health Action webinar, What to Expect as the Eviction Moratorium Ends. My name is Makamai Namahoy, and I am the Public Health Programs Associate at Hawaii Public Health Institute. Before we get started, there are some Zoom housekeeping to go over. Next slide, please. For all questions, please utilize the chat box or the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. No continuing education credits will be provided during this webinar, and all webinars will be available on the Hawaii Public Health Training HUI's YouTube channel. Next slide. So without further ado, I would like to present our trainer for today. Dan O'Mara is the managing attorney for the Housing and Consumer Unit at the Legal Aid Society of Hawaii. In residential landlord-tenant cases, legal aid represents the tenants. Legal Aid also has a Fair Housing Initiatives program through the Department of Housing and Urban Development to assist people who believe they have been victims of housing discrimination. Legal Aid is the state's oldest and largest nonprofit public interest law firm with offices statewide. Legal Aid also helps provide civil legal aid to the most vulnerable in our society. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it on to Dan.
Hi, thank you guys for having us on. So as she noted, I'm at Legal Aid. I hand up our Housing and Consumer Unit. We're very much at the forefront of all the eviction issues that are coming up right now. The moratorium, if people are aware of it, the eviction moratorium ends on Friday, presumably. And I'm going to share some slides. But one of the things that she mentioned, I'm not exactly sure, but I think this is an audience with people who are in the healthcare profession. And she mentioned it, but we do fair housing discrimination. And a big part of our practice is working with people with disabilities and getting them accommodations, be it a parking space or something to help their living situation for their wheelchair or support animals, things like that. So in the healthcare profession, if you run across people with disabilities having housing challenges, we're a really good resource for that, and we can do a lot around that. So I'm going to share the screen now. Let's see. Okay. You should have a slide that says eviction prevention.
Yep, looks good, Dan.
Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to give you some basic information about the eviction process, and there's some things that have just happened in the last night and today too that might impact this, and I'll fill you in on that because it's literally just happened, so that we can't even haven't done any slides on it yet. So what we have here is I'm going to talk about the eviction process, the impact of Act 57. And Act 57 is, you may not be in your wheelhouse or something you're familiar with, but that's the new law that goes into effect. Right now, it goes into effect Saturday, in which landlords can evict people for non-payment of rent. So for the last year, almost year and a half, a landlord could not evict a tenant who wasn't paying rent. And so that is set right now to end on Friday. And Act 57 is a way to sort of soften the blow of that eviction moratorium ending. We have some examples, and I'll cover those to the extent it makes sense timing-wise, and then talk about our role. So I'll go on from there. One of the things to know is that somebody can't be evicted you can't force somebody out of a house without a court order. So landlords try to do it all the time. They will maybe turn off utilities, or they just bug the heck out of a tenant to the point where the tenant just finally throws up their hands and says, I'm out of here, not going to do it anymore, and leaves. So, but if they reach out for assistance, they are entitled to have the landlord go to court and get a court order to make them leave. We represent tenants, but part of it, and we just so you know, everybody knows that they may or may not know about legal aid. We don't charge. We don't charge attorney's fees. We don't charge the tenant or any of our clients any money for our legal services. We get a lot of different grants, and a lot of what we represent is based on lower income. So we can, if you're lower income, we can take your case. I mentioned the housing discrimination. That's a area of law that it doesn't matter what your income is. HUD wants us to pursue any work with anybody regardless of their income if they're subject to fair housing discrimination. So to start the process, it's a fundamental to know that you can't be evicted without a court order. Okay. And part of the reason it matters, this whole eviction thing matters, is that if you have an eviction, it's on the public record. If your landlord files it, it's going to be in the court records, which are public records open to anybody. So they aren't necessarily reported on credit bureaus, but sometimes, depending on your landlord, maybe they do report it. Some background checks pull up public records, so the eviction may show up in some sort of background check if you have it. And if you get evicted, you can be subject to paying the landlord's attorney's fees and costs. And as noted, it can impact your credit scores. But the other part, and this is a big part for us at Legal Aid, is that a lot of people have subsidized housing, and it takes different forms. They might be in public housing, they might be in some, if people are familiar with the Section 8 voucher, that's where, if you're living in a place and the rent is $1,500 a month and your income and you make $1,000 a month, Section 8 will only make you pay 30% of your income. So if you make $1,000 a month, your portion of the rent is $300. If the rent's $1,500, Section 8, which is HUD, the Housing and Urban Development, federal government picks up the $1,200 portion of your rent. So I kind of go into a little detail on that, because if you have a subsidy, it's a huge part of your health and well-being. Having housing is so fundamental to mental and physical health that we pay particular attention to people who have subsidized housing, because if you get evicted and you have a Section 8 voucher, or you have one of these subsidies, you risk losing that subsidy for the rest of your life. I mean, literally, it's a lifetime implication to if you lose your voucher. So we are very tuned into that, because almost invariably those people who have a Section 8 voucher or subsidy aren't going to be able to hire an attorney. And frankly, there's not many attorneys who represent tenants. And part of the reason most often that a tenant is being evicted is because they can't pay the rent. If they can't pay the rent, they're very likely not be able to pay an attorney to represent them on that. So that's why all of this stuff that's about to happen with the evictions starting up again is hugely important to our state and to our population, and to everybody's health and well-being, frankly, having safe housing. Now, before all this happened, before the pandemic, if you were getting evicted, you get a notice. The landlord would file a complaint in court, like step 2. Step 3, you go back to court. Next, you go to court and then you answer it and say, yes, I agree, or no, I don't. And then there might be some mediation in between in step 4. And then step 5, you'd have, if you want to fight it, if the tenant wants to fight it, then it goes to a pretrial, then it goes to trial. And ultimately what the landlord is looking to get is the writ of possession. And that's the court document that allows, that forces the tenant out, allows the sheriff to basically evict you from your house. And then after that, then you can be subject to the damages, which means, did you leave the house in poor condition, or the property in poor condition, or did you still owe rent? So that is part of the equation as far as how the process works. And that's how it worked pretty much before the pandemic. Since then, with this Act 57, they've changed the nature of the termination notice. So prior to the pandemic, if you wanted to evict somebody, it was a simple 3 sentences, right? It said, you owe us this much rent, you haven't paid it. If you don't pay it by within 5 days, we're going to evict you. Very simple, 5 days, you can get somebody out. What Act 57 does is it now converts it to a notice of 15 days. So instead of 5 days, it takes 15 days, but you also have to include mediation. And I think as a policy matter, a lot of people in the state, the judiciary, the legislature, and the governor's office, the courts and landlords, I mean, tenants, that really the mediation is interposed now necessarily because of the notice. It means that when you get the 15-day notice, you get the notice as a tenant, and then it goes to the mediation center also. And then the mediation center is supposed to try and coordinate setting up a mediation. And the goal is that you can try and mediate it before you go to court and avoid having to go to court at all. And it also gives time to try and get some of the rental assistance that's out there. And it is this, the process is set out here. So right now, effective August 7th, 2021, so that's Saturday, that what this does is the landlord can't file an eviction for non-payment unless you're at least 4 months behind initially. So they've got a schedule so that it phases in evictions depending on how far behind you are in rent. So it's 4 months behind and 3 months and 2 months and 1 month. So it phases out from starting August 7th, you can start to try and evict people who are 4 months behind. And if they're 1 month behind, you can't file in court until next January. The notion was that it would sort of soften the expression foam the runway. It was provide a softer landing to give people more time to try and work out their situation, which is why they phased it in. Now, the termination notice had to say how much you were due and give you mediation information and whether you've applied for rental assistance. And so I'm not sure how aware everybody on this is, but our state has been provided $350 million of rental assistance to pay for back rent, which if it was all given out, the estimate is that 350 million would cover all the back rent for everybody, but it's only available to people who are under 80% of the area median income. So if you make over 80% of the area median income, you're not eligible for this assistance. So anybody 80% or below can get this rental assistance. So that's what this Act 57 is doing, which comes into effect, is that that it gives you that time to try and get your rental assistance in there. I said it was $350 million for the whole state. And the better, and Hawaii, just so you know, is actually one of the better states as far as getting it out, but we're still under, I think statewide, out of 350 million, we've given away less than 50 million. So in 6 months, and this money is supposed to end by the end of the year, in 6 months, we've only managed to get out 50 million out of 350 million. So whatever that percentage is, 1/7 would put you at 15% or something like that, 16, 17%, or less. But that sounds like a lot, but really the stark part is nationwide, there's $45 billion of rental assistance available, and they've given away less than $5 billion. So nationwide, $45 billion worth of money. And at this point, they've only distributed $5 billion, which shows you that it's not getting out very quickly. And so I'm going to fill in the blanks here, because this is where something has happened in the last day that impacts all of this potentially. I mentioned that the state, and maybe people are all aware of this, there was an eviction moratorium in the state. So starting last April of 2020, the governor in his emergency proclamations said that you can't evict somebody for not paying their rent. You could evict them if there was health and safety issues or some narrow exceptions. But basically, if you couldn't pay your rent, you couldn't be evicted from April 2020 until through August 6th. So a couple of weeks ago, he announced that August 6th was going to be the last eviction, the end of the eviction moratorium. And that's what made the changes of Act 57 kick into place August 7th, was because the moratorium ends. And so that's why these new protections to allow more time and to get mediation and to do rental assistance before a landlord can evict you and to phase them in depending on how far behind you are. That all came into being because that was the end of the moratorium, and it coincided. And this will probably be kind of arcane, or maybe you've heard about it, maybe you saw it in the news just last night or this morning. For context, the CDC imposed a moratorium on non-payment evictions last September. So from September of last year, it was continued all the way until July 31st, which is less than just a few days ago. The CDC had a moratorium that said you couldn't evict somebody for non-payment because they viewed it as a health crisis, that if people were being evicted for non-payment in the midst of a pandemic, that you were really putting more people at risk of homelessness and spreading and sheltering in place, all the things that were implicated by the CDC wanting to do this. So it ended July 31st. And so it didn't really matter much to Hawaii because we had better protection under our state moratorium, our state eviction moratorium. So the CDC moratorium was there. It was good, it was nice, and it worked in the whole country. It didn't have much of applicability to Hawaii. And you might have seen last week that the president was asking Congress to extend the eviction moratorium because there had been a recent Supreme Court ruling that sort of said, hey, we're not going to do anything if it ends on July 31st unless Congress or the president does something else. And Congress wasn't able to do anything in whatever period of time they had. So nothing happened. And then yesterday, afternoon, our time, late in the evening in the East Coast, there was a new CDC moratorium came out. And so this is completely fresh, and it's thrown a lot of, I'm not sure a good word. Chaos and confusion sound a little harsh, but it's thrown a lot of uncertainty. That's a kind of more benign word. It's thrown a lot of uncertainty into the eviction process, because what the CDC moratorium that came in yesterday is effective from August 1st to October 1st, 60 days. But it's got a twist now. It used to be the moratorium is replacing with the CDC said that you couldn't do during this pandemic, you simply could not evict somebody for non-payment as long as they could certify to certain facts that they were impacted by COVID, that they tried for rental assistance, just certain certifications. Well, because of the Supreme Court ruling, the CDC moratorium that came out yesterday and is being debated today, here in the state in DC as to whether it applies to Hawaii, provides the same protection if you fit within the criteria. And what they've done is, because of the spike in COVID, the moratorium applies based on each county, whether your number of cases per 100,000 is over a certain level, and whether your positivity testing is over a certain level. So what they're saying is that we want to provide protection to the counties that are the most impacted by the spike in the COVID numbers, which, that just starts sort of the uncertainty of it all, right? So in Hawaii, we have hit the numbers. Our numbers are above what the CDC says in order for the moratorium to apply. However, we're not at the level of positive tests that would make it apply. So the closest county, so for example, there's 5 counties here. The closest county to it is Big Island, Hawaii Island. Is the positivity rate they've set is 8%, and Big Island right now is at 7.7%. So in Honolulu or Oahu is 6.4 or 6.6% positivity. So we've got the case numbers, but we don't have the positivity for this moratorium to apply. But Big Island is closest to it, and so that sort of sets the stage as to how. So if you hit those certain levels of COVID impact, then this moratorium applies to you. But the twist that makes it really, really, really tricky, that's throwing everybody off, is that they're not sure exactly how those numbers are figured, because they're, each state kind of measures their numbers differently. But the other part is, so for that 60-day period, your county can go in or out of protection. So if your numbers go up, so if Big Island being the closest one right now, if their numbers keep going up, right now it doesn't apply to them, but a week from now, it might apply to them. So that is a challenge, because if you're a landlord trying to evict somebody, and so on Saturday, there's no CDC moratorium that applies to you because the COVID numbers aren't so bad, you start the eviction process. A week later, if the numbers have gotten worse on Big Island, then you're not allowed to start the eviction or keep it going. And likewise for the courts, they have this, they'll have this bunch of cases that come in, and whether they can do anything or not will depend on every day finding out where each county is on this COVID level. And so you could go into and be protected, but then if you have 14 days in a row where the levels drop, then you're not protected. I mean, it's all, I'm sorry for being so technical and nerdy about it, but it's kind of, I think that the nerdiness of it makes you realize how complicated it makes for landlords and the courts and even tenants to know what to do. Because now there's this new CDC moratorium that may or may not apply. That hasn't been definitively decided. The indications are that there's no county right now in the state that it applies to. That's after less than 24 hours, right? So they're trying to digest it. And then, so you have that going on, and then you have this new process for landlords to go into mediation. The people at the State Office of Consumer Protection, they're trying to advise the governor on this. The governor has people saying, well, we think it does apply. Others saying, well, we think it doesn't apply, for a lot of different reasons that are kind of even more boring than everything I've told you so far. Then we had people in DC from Representative Case's office reaching out to us about some of the landlord-tenant issues, and then they point out some fine print somewhere, and they're trying to get to the CDC to see whether this moratorium does apply to Hawaii or doesn't apply to Hawaii. And in the meantime, the moratorium in the state is supposed to end Friday in the face of all this other uncertainty with the federal moratorium. But the governor will do another proclamation between now and Friday, because he necessarily has to keep his emergency going, because if he doesn't have the emergency going, he doesn't have the ability to restrict whatever it is, masking or travel or whatever it is that all the powers he has right now. So there will be another proclamation between today and Friday, because the current one expires on Friday. The question is whether he then says, geez, there's so much uncertainty because of this CDC moratorium, I'm going to put the state eviction moratorium back in place or not. I mean, so that you have the advantage today that it's Wednesday, and you've got this sort of this, you're on the cutting edge of knowing about the CDC thing, which is good. But a week from now, we'll know whether whether it sorts out whether we're protected by the CDC moratorium or whether the governor renewed his moratorium or he let it expire like he said he was going to do. So that's just a long way of saying this is the best we know right now. The best we know right now, and that kind of if it leads to questions, happy to answer them. So you have these things in play, which is Act 57, which is supposed to take care of Hawaii and making it lessen the impact on the courts and on tenants, but lets the landlords start to get their back rent, evicting people for back rent. That's supposed to happen August 7th, overlaid with this thing that started August 3rd that is saying maybe you can't do that from the CDC, which is why it's as I say, you're right on the edge of everything that's happening right now. So the next few slides I'll cover them if time allows or if it makes sense, because we have the next few slides are some examples for people with rental assistance. And I'll put it up just so I can talk to you a little bit about rental assistance, the first example. Let's see. So the gist of it is, because this is apart from all these little rules about can you evict somebody, can't you evict somebody, the essence of it, the big player in the rental eviction right now is the rental assistance programs. And on Oahu, the rental assistance program is run through the county, but it's being managed by Catholic Charities and CNHA, Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement. They're running the program here, and they have, I want to say, $60 or $70 million in phase one, and they'll have another maybe close to 200 million in phase two. But right now, of the I think it's 114 million that they have now, they've given out something like 30 or 40 on Oahu. So there's still a lot of money available. There's a lot of money available that we have, but it's getting out very, very slowly. I mean, we had people who got rental assistance applied on the first date, April 5th. And they literally just got it last week. What's that, 4 months, 3 months? Long time is what it is, to get that rental assistance. In the meantime, that was $23,000 that goes to the landlord, but it turned out their rent the amount they owed was like over 30,000, but only 23,000 was eligible. And that tells you sort of some of the volume of the numbers that are available, because you can get paid rental assistance from March 2020 through December of 2021. So you can get paid up to 12 months of rent, plus you can get paid 3 months in advance. So if and we've had clients have had this too, where they got rental assistance for 7 months, like for this year, and they weren't going to be able to pay August, September, October, and they also got those 3 months paid in advance to their landlord. So the amount of money available is enormous. It's a lot of money, but there's a certain again, I don't mean it in a pejorative way, but there's a bureaucracy. There's a paper trail, and there's federal requirements. And I know that the current administration has said they want to encourage states to get out the money as quickly as possible with as little hassle as possible. But then the written rules require certain documentation that's sometimes just hard to get. So they want to encourage them to do it quicker, but they also have these rules in place that they're still following. So that's the whole, that's part of the rental assistance thing. And so right now, Hawaii, Maui, and Big Island are all still open for applications. And Maui covers Molokai and Lanai. So those are all open for rental assistance. Oahu is the one that opens up and shuts down. The first time it opened up on April 5th, it was open for 20 minutes and they got, I think it was 10,000 applications in 20 minutes. The second time they opened, it stayed open for about 2 hours and they again got a similar number of applications. The third time it opened up again, it stayed open for like a month. So it really was just in the last 2 or 3 weeks that they had to shut down the Oahu rent portal again. It's oneoahu.org is how you reach out for rental assistance. And they're going to open up, our understanding is that we thought they were going to open up again this week, but it looks like they're going to open up maybe the beginning of next week. And it's kind of important that they open up again because if all those things I talked about with the moratorium ending and non-payment evictions starting again as early as Saturday, it's important that people be able to get their money. So I'm going to, that was just a long way to talk about rental assistance, which is a huge part of this. So I'm going to skip those for right now, and then I'll move on to, and I can go back to those. This talks about what services are available for people to are available for people to look at. And so I mentioned that the rental assistance, this is the 80% AMI chart, which is for each island, for each county, excuse me, each of the 4 counties. You can see on Oahu, just using one person, you're eligible if you make $70,000 a year. On Kauai, it's $57,000, Maui 57, and on Hawaii Island, it's $47,950. So depending on your family size, that number goes up. And so you have to fit within these in order to be able to get the rental assistance. These are the pertinent numbers. And this is, I mentioned, the bureaucracy. These are some of the things, they require documentation, proof of residency, the proof that the bill is, proof of your income, proof of your COVID hardship, like, unemployment checks or a letter from an employer. Like, for instance, if you didn't get unemployment and your employer went out of business, and now you have to prove that you aren't working, but you didn't qualify for unemployment, or maybe you're still waiting for assistance, and the restaurant or the retail shop that you used to work at is gone, you can see why some of these things are just potentially hard. How do I prove that I'm not working when my employer doesn't even exist anymore and I didn't get my unemployment yet? So, we've also seen some landlords refuse to participate. And one of the reasons they don't participate is some landlords operate what for lack of a better word, is illegal rentals. They're renting out a bedroom or 2 or 3 bedrooms in their unit in their home as apartments, and they aren't legal. They don't have the proper kitchen or whatever it is they don't have it, or they're against the zoning. There's all sorts of reasons that the landlord doesn't want to become known that they're doing rentals because they'll get busted. Or some of the landlords, maybe they don't want to pay GE tax. And so if they don't do a GE tax license, well, one of the things the rental assistance people ask for is your GE tax license number. And if you don't have one, you're not really wild about giving it out for rental assistance, because now suddenly you're on the radar. and you're going to get a 1099. That means the feds now know that you're getting income that you probably weren't reporting. So some of these landlords are just saying, well, never mind. I just want you out, but never mind, I don't want to participate. So they've kind of gotten around that now, because if your landlord does that, they will allow you to, as a tenant, to get the rental assistance directly paid to the tenant. You have to pay it to your landlord and get a receipt. A lot of trust in that. We had a client who the money was supposed to go straight to the landlord, and that was like $27,000. And our client got the check in her name for $27,000. And our client was very scrupulous and honest. And she said, what do I do with this? Right. And we talked to the landlord, and she just said, endorse it over to us and deliver it to us. But if she had said nothing, if she took that $27,000, it probably would come back and haunt her at some level, but there would have been nothing stopping. She had a $27,000 check in her pocket and no money because she's an unemployed student. And for whatever reason, the rental assistance gave it to her. And, and she did work it out. I don't know, this is maybe I don't know exactly the crowd here, but, I said, you just need to endorse it over. And apparently a lot of people of a certain age don't use checks, and endorsing it over, she wasn't sure even what that meant, to endorse it over, because she literally doesn't even have a checkbook. So the notion of endorsing the check over was sort of foreign to her. So we had to walk her through that so she could endorse it over to the housing provider. But lots of little twists and turns. And then we get people, some of them are requiring Social Security cards. Some people just don't have them. You can be totally legit and everything. You just don't have your Social Security card after however many years. And so we're trying to work through that, proving you have a lease or that you rent. So some people, they don't necessarily have a copy of their lease to give to the assistance provider. And just some people just have a lack of access. There's a technology part to this that makes it much easier to upload these documents, but some people don't have access to computers, or English is their second language. They don't really speak English. And so there's language barriers. So those are some of the things that cover it. And like on Oahu, you can get $2,000 a month for rent and up to $500 a month for utilities. Kauai, they just want to make sure they give their money away. So they set their limit at $4,500 a month, period. Rent, utilities, they didn't care. They give it up to $4,500 a month. And part of the reason, apparently on Kauai, a lot of extended families share homes. So it's, you might have $4,500, sounds like a lot of rent if you're only at 80% AMI, but it's not so much if you got several people who are sharing that home. So Kauai's been very successful giving out the money. If you're on Kauai, they are doing everything in their power to give you the rental assistance. And it's working. They have a credit union, local credit union, working with people. They're used to dealing with money and getting applications. So it's working really well on Kauai. The other part, the resources is, and this is maybe, again, everybody handles their money differently, but a lot of what's happened is budgeting, right? And figuring out your finances. And there are services out there for natural counseling. There's HUD certified housing counselors out there that can help people with their budget, because there's not much point. It happens all the time, right? Because people view housing as some kind of priority over paying other bills. But even then, they might not have enough money for that. But planning your budget for your housing can be really helpful now, because maybe you haven't been paying for a while and you had a little extra money you didn't have to spend on housing. So you hopefully have saved a little bit of it to help you move on to the next place. But that's another big part of what's going on out there, is trying to make sure that people have the right resources to help them through their finances. Then you've got some of the rapid rehousing programs and homeless prevention programs. The state has a whole system to deal with people in homelessness. But the sense is that the need for shelter is going to increase, but the shelters haven't gotten bigger. The pandemic, so there's been some extra access, like the city and county has taken over a couple hotels, I think it is, so they can quarantine people. They're thinking that they can turn those into shelter housing. But like if you take IHS, the shelter that's based over by Evicted and the Costco, they only have so many beds, period. And if they're full, they're full. So it's not like they can increase their capacity like that if there's a need for more shelter and more housing. And I don't know, I put on here the coordinated entry system for access to transitional housing and emergency shelters. And I don't know whether as healthcare providers you're familiar with that. There's a system, it's called VIASPDOT. I mean, I'll tell you what it means, because if it's the vulnerability index, the service prioritization decision assistance tool. A lot of jargon, a lot of letters there. What it really means is that if you want to take advantage of the homeless services like shelter or meals or healthcare that are provided through the statewide system, then you need to enter your information into this VIASPDOT system. So a lot of if you ever hear about people doing homeless outreach, a lot of what they're doing, they might have a computer with them and they're entering information like your name and social security number, just information about you into the system so that you have access to the services. So it's sort of it's a ticket to entry into transitional housing and emergency shelter grants. And they're good about it. There's a lot of agencies that participate in this system. We have homeless outreach staff ourselves who are out there working through that system to try and get people those services. And it's just, they say most people will at least get into the system. There's some of the chronic homeless who just don't want any part of it, who won't participate. But generally speaking, it's a big deal. And if in the homeless world, if as healthcare providers, you may or may not be aware of it, but I share it because you may be aware of it. I want to just mention it to you. And the other thing is the public housing and Section 8 vouchers. So we talked about Section 8 and the importance of subsidized housing, but both Section 8 vouchers are handled by the city and county has a division that handles Section 8 vouchers, and the HPHA, the Hawaii Public Housing Authority, they're out on School Street, Middle Street, somewhere in there, their main office, but their public housing is throughout the state. They also handle some of these Section 8 vouchers. So there's public housing where you just live in that particular building and you pay a percentage of your rent toward you pay a percentage of your income toward the rent. And there are some people who pay zero rent because they have no income. They might be on food stamps, and food stamps don't count against you. You don't have to pay a portion of your food stamps to pay your rent. So those are like public housing. And the Section 8 vouchers are the ones where that person can have that and they can apply anywhere, any rental unit that will accept a Section 8 voucher, and then they can live wherever they want, depending on who takes the voucher from them. So there's some of the other ways that, dealing with what's coming up, imminently is happening. Legal aid is out there. We do a lot of things, and since this is a healthcare organization or support group, legal aid is that we can help people with that Act 57, that notice, and obviously now I didn't even include it, but this whole CDC moratorium thing, and of course the landlord tenant code. We can make sure that what's going on with your landlord and the tenant is working well, and it's working the way it should be done, not be done improperly. And help you try and mitigate your damages, get the right assistance documentation so you can pay your, or at least apply for the rental assistance. It's relevant. It's not even a plug. It's just that, because we don't need a plug. People say, well, I want to give you business. It's not like we're marketing ourselves to get business in the sense that we want it because it makes us more money. We want to do it because it matters and we do it. And it's our mission. We don't charge people. So people don't know that, we help with unemployment, getting your unemployment. We help with public assistance. So we have a whole benefits group that'll help you with SNAP or TANF or MedQuest, all the things that just basic assistance. And we also have a whole outreach group that deals with health navigators, trying to get people medical insurance. We'll help people with bankruptcy. We help, we do a lot of stuff. Frankly, that matters to people. We do the sort of practical law that people actually need on a day-to-day basis. But another big part of our practice that's not mentioned here is we do a lot of family law work. We do with child custody issues, divorces, and that sort of thing. We help with immigration. So if you are dealing with an immigrant population, we have a immigration justice center that that's ours. We have a staff who work with immigration issues. So legal aid does a lot of stuff, and I don't know how familiar people are with legal aid. And it's not a pitch for legal aid. It's just that we're out there as a resource. We're a resource, and we know a lot of stuff about a lot of things. And I want to make sure people are aware of that. Now, the mediation is required under Act 57. It's supposed to be a neutral, impartial mediator trying to bring the people together and reach a long-term agreement on their housing to try and our goal from the tenant side is to try and preserve the housing. Sometimes can't be preserved, but maybe there's a graceful exit. We can get a payment plan, or we can get them to forgive the rent and allow them to move in a month. Or, we even had it where somebody was far behind and the landlord said, well, I just want them out, and they had any number of reasons. I want to sell the place, or I want to, for whatever reason. And we said, well, they can't afford to move. So we've actually had, even though they owed it back rent, the landlord said, I want you out enough that I will forgive all the back rent and I will pay you enough money to help you relocate and pay your first month's rent at your next place. So, there's lots of ways to try and make graceful exits if that's the ultimate solution for that landlord-tenant relationship. A dignified exit is much better than the sheriff knocking on your door and moving your possessions outside. Let's see. If you're dealing with people who are at risk, these are some of the questions you can ask. We always want the paper trail. What is it that they provided you? And our website is down there at the bottom, the legalaidhawaii.org. We do, I don't know if we have it here, I'll see. So we have an intake hotline that's open in the morning and the afternoon, and that's 536-4302, which may be on one of these slides. And then we also do online intake. So if people have access to a computer, or if you have a person you're trying to get them help and you have a computer and you can help them, if you go to our legalaidhawaii.org, you do an online intake that way. And right now, this is that whole fluid thing about the moratorium and the CDC moratorium. For this whole time, since March of last year, 2020 through now, you couldn't just give a regular 45-day notice. You couldn't raise rent. And so that might change shortly too. That might change this week too. But again, don't know. And the only thing that's missing on that last slide is our phone number, which is 536-4302. Call us.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. That was a lot of
Thank
great
you.
information. So we have about like 10 more minutes for questions. We've got a few from the chat and I wanted to pass them along to you. So the first one that we had is, what is the current status on the rent increase moratorium for landlords? When will landlords be able to increase rent for their tenants?
Right now, it's prohibited under the proclamation that created the moratorium, the eviction moratorium. We will know by Friday. It's that close. We have to see whether he's going to suspend that part of the proclamation. There's a statute that prohibited rent increases. And there's been talk, again, both ways, that he might do away with that on Friday also, or it might stay, and because everything's in flux. So the short answer is maybe Saturday, if you give a 45-day notice, and maybe not until later, depending on what the governor does this week. So.
Still up in the air. Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a way to get rental assistance without having an eviction letter for a client who is behind on rent?
Yes, as long as they owe the money and they can, even if the landlord said, I'm not going to evict you, if the landlord is willing to say, here's a ledger, here's how much you owe, that'll do it. All they have to do is know that the rental assistance provider has to know that there is in fact rent owing and how much. So you don't have to actually be in court or anything like that or get a nasty letter. It can be, let's go work this out. Get it.
Next question we received, what are resources on Maui that assist with language barriers for tenants and landlords? Do you have any to share?
Well, I can tell you that Catholic Charities is running Maui's rental assistance program. And so Catholic Charities is providing language access. And since they can apply both as landlords and tenants, they would help with both landlords and tenants on Maui. And the other ones that will have language access too is if you reach out to the Mediation Center on Maui. And I didn't put this on a slide, but I'm going to put it because it might be relevant to some people. There's, as I said, the new notice is very complicated, 3-page notice for the 15-day Act 57 notice. There's templates of it up on repnakamura.com. repnakamura.com. She was one of the sponsors of the bill. She has posted templates that a bunch of us worked on that are sort of fillable PDFs, but there's 3 pages, but there's one for each county. And so the Maui notice on repnakamura.com has the Mediation Center information on it. So you can reach out to the Mediation Center, and they are supposed to provide language services, which would be landlords or tenants for that matter. So.
Okay, and we'll add that into the Mahalo email to folks who are on the call. We'll add those links and resources.
Yeah, the repnakamura.com was in the Kakua line column yesterday, but for our knowledge, that's the only place that's posted that statewide. So, anybody who wants to understand whether you're a landlord or tenant, just go out there and check out what the form looks like.
Next question we received. How can homeowners access homeowner assistance funds when they become available? Do you know, or when do you think they'll become available?
Our understanding is going to be $50 million. We think that's a statewide number. And they're shooting, our understanding is September, October, and it will very, very, very likely be through the same oneoahu.org if you're on this island. And it'll be distributed the same way through the same people who are doing the rental assistance. So oneoahu.org, Catholic Charities would be the good way to check up on it.
Next question. Normally prior to COVID, if a landlord issued an eviction letter, the tenant had 45 days to leave once the landlord sends you the letter of eviction. If the landlord seeks legal action, does this new 15-day rule to vacate the property go into effect after the 15 days? Or does after the 45 days, or does this mean the 45-day rule no longer applies?
Well, that's a good nuanced question, because it gets to that first question, which is, are you going to be able to send out a 45-day notice? If it turns out that you can send it out after Friday, I can give you the technical reason, but it's so technical. It's just a statute, and I don't want to bore anybody with that, but the 45-day notice, if it goes back into effect, doesn't require a reason. So if you do the 45-day notice correctly, the 15-day notice for Act 57 doesn't apply. But a 45-day notice isn't about back rent theoretically. It's just that you want the person out. So you've got that tension of, can you get the rent or not get the rent? Are you really trying to evict somebody for payment or just because of 45-day notice? So it's Friday or Saturday, we'll know a better answer on that. Sorry.
Oh, no. All right, thank you. Aside from the CDC moratorium extension, do you know if our governor is considering extending the moratorium here due to the uptick in cases?
I think until yesterday, he was not considering it. I think the CDC moratorium has made him there. We know that he's thinking about it, but we don't know what his thinking is because there's a lot of momentum. A lot of landlords just want to start evicting again. It's that simple. So there's a lot of pressure in that regard. So again, we'll know by Friday. But he wasn't until yesterday. He wasn't thinking. It was done. It was a done deal. Done deal. Our sense is it's probably still a done deal, but you know, there's that CDC thing just provided that little inkling of doubt.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We had one person ask if a client has applied for Catholic Charities and OHA rental assistance, but has not received any word back. Is this normal? Is there somewhere that they could follow up on the application? Or do you recommend that they apply again when it shows up on oneoahu.org?
One of the things that these systems are set up so they check, because they only want you to have one application going at a time. So if you have one with somebody and you apply again, it slows you down. So you're better off trying to reach out either by calling the rental assistance agency or if they've given you an email, because Catholic Charities gives you an email alert with a RURP, Rental and Utility Relief Program number, RURP number. So you should be able to use that number to reach out to whichever agency you're with. That's how it works.
Okay, so I think we have a few more minutes left, about 4, to the end of our webinar. If you have any last minute thoughts, anything you want to leave with our participants before we close our webinar?
You know, to the extent, whatever chaos happens or whatever tsunami happens after Saturday, the real key for almost any situation is participate. Because if you don't participate, you're out, right? If you participate, you at least have the chance to maybe get another month or 2, or at least to maybe preserve your housing. So, the big thing is just participate. And if you need to, get legal advice. I mean, call legal aid, frankly. I mean, if you're a landlord, you're better off calling the landlord tenant hotline through the Office of Consumer Protection, because they're going to be better about helping landlords than we are.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dan. We want to thank you for being our guest today. Thank you to all those who joined us on Zoom. And lastly, I want to thank all the HIPHI staff members that have been helping behind the scenes. Please save the date for August 18th for our next public health action webinar, and we will be sharing those details as we get closer to the date. Be well, be safe, and we hope to see you all on our next webinar. Thank you. Bye,
Thank you all.